Some games don't just disappoint you, they betray you. They take the worlds you love, the characters you've invested in, and rip them apart. And over the years, I felt this pain plenty of times, and today I'm going to be talking about some of the games that hurt the most. And trust me, one of them is absolutely brutal. And I'll be talking about a lot of different video games in this video, and so there'll be something for just about everybody. And it won't just be a negative video, because a lot of these video game series are totally worth playing. And there might have been one video game that felt like this big betrayal moment, or it was very disappointing, but there'll be some awesome video game recommendations in this video if you've never played some of the games in these series. And so, with all that being said, let's go ahead and get started. And the first game that I wanted to talk about is Mass Effect 3. And I think that for anyone that's played the Mass Effect series, they know exactly what I'm going to be talking about, and it's the ending of Mass Effect 3. And this was such a huge moment for so many people that had invested so much time and energy and emotional investment into the series. They were all really looking forward to the Mass Effect ending. And I love the Mass Effect series. It's an awesome RPG series if you've never played it. But the last 10 minutes are so bad. They're so brutal. It throws away so much of the time and energy and investment that you put into the series. It was such a disrespectful ending to the point where actually the company had to change the ending. And that barely made it acceptable. If we're being honest, I don't even think it really made it acceptable. And it's just so disappointing because I like to think about the Mass Effect series as kind of like the Game of Thrones of video games in the sense that it's this awesome series. It has so much potential, but you have the ending. And it's just so disappointing where the rest of the series is cheapened. And it's the same thing I feel like with Game of Thrones. I thought the last season of Game of Thrones was not very good. And so Mass Effect echoes this in so many different ways. And it's just got such amazing potential. I have a video on this if you want to check it out. But essentially, Mass Effect it felt like this huge betrayal moment for so many people that had invested so much time and energy into the series. I love Mass Effect. Garrus is my favorite character in the entire series. There's an awesome cast of characters, whether it's Rex, Miranda, Garrus, whoever, right? So it's an awesome series that's worth playing, but it just felt like this huge betrayal moment. It's such a huge betrayal moment for RPG gamers. And I think that if you were there at the time, there was such anger, there was such outrage at the laziness, especially with what was just promised in terms of the resolution with some of the characters' stories and the overall story, to the point where it just did so much damage to the Mass Effect series. Okay, and so the next video game I want to talk about is Rome 2 Total War. And so I love the Total War series, or at least the earlier games, not so much recently. And Rome Total War is my favorite game in the entire series, the original. It's an amazing video game. And when Rome 2 Total War was announced, a lot of people were really looking forward to it because a lot of people share my sentiment in the sense that it's their favorite Total War game. So people saw the graphics looked absolutely amazing. People loved Rome Total War, so they're really looking forward to this updated iteration in the series. And the game just released poorly. It just wasn't very fun. There was a lot of graphical issues or a lot of performance issues. They sold back the Blood DLC to you, or they sold Blood DLC to you, and that was just such a disrespectful moment that has kind of continued to develop in the Total War series from this point. And I personally didn't really care for the idea where they kind of split your cities, your regions into these kind of different nodes, and it just felt very unfun. There just was something about the game that just didn't feel very fun to me. And I know that people have improved the game with mods and stuff like that, but it just seemed like the game just was losing its fun. In my opinion, the Total War series kind of started to decline from that point. I think the AI really started to see some wear and tear. You could have argued that the AI was facing issues well before that in Shogun or Empire Total War or even Medieval 2 Total War. But I think that just over time, with being there again and again, you just really started to see the cracks in the armor. And I just think that those combination of factors really, it just felt very disappointing to me. And it's hard for me to put the problems of this game into words. It's like you have this feeling that just something feels off. The soul is off. And like I said, I think it comes down to some of the gameplay mechanic changes that they had, performance issues, the feeling that it was not finished, and of course the AI stuff. And like I said, I know that a lot of mods have improved the game, but just to me, it's just such a huge disappointment, especially with my love of the first Rome Total War game, which is an amazing video game. And a lot of the early Total War games are awesome. And I think this one hurts too, because a lot of people love the Total War series, but the Total War series, in my opinion at least, has kind of been in a very bad state. The AI has really started to show its problems. There's a lot of laziness and a lot of greed in a lot of ways. And I think a lot of people see the potential that Total War has because it's so awesome. You have these huge battles and it's just immersive graphics and it's so cool. It's so awesome. And I think people want a competitor to to the Total War series. And so to me, Rome 2 Total War is kind of this moment where you kind of have seen the Total War series decline to the point where I just really, it's a shame to see Total War in the state that it's in. And I know a lot of people do enjoy Total War, but if you've played the older games, it's very disappointing. And for me, Rome 2 Total War is that kind of big disappointment moment, that big betrayal moment. So next, this one's gonna hurt for a lot of people, Kerbal Space Program 2. So Kerbal Space Program is an amazing video game. It's an awesome video game. I remember first learning about Kerbal Space Program in the really early days, before it was even on Steam, when it was kind of underground. And when I saw this game, I knew it was so special. And it's one of those video games that comes around only ever so often where it has this kind of impact, I think, beyond just video games. And so when you look at Kerbal Space Program, it's a very difficult game. It's a hard game, but there is this passion to the game. There's this complexity to the game. And ultimately, you had these huge communities that built up around Kerbal Space Program. You had all these mods that made it a little bit easier, like MechJeb, stuff like that. And, I think it really did inspire a lot of people to go into engineering. It inspired a lot of people to go into science or explore video games that they maybe weren't normally used to. And so it's just one of those games that it's so unique and creative, and it has this impact of influencing people's lives beyond this. It's kind of like The Sims. That The Sims inspired some people to be architects. Microsoft Flight Simulator inspired a lot of people to be pilots. And so I think it's very similar with Kerbal Space Program because it's such a unique game and it has this science aspect and all those things. And so when the second game came around, or it was announced, people were super excited because there was this awesome foundation for the game. There's this awesome foundation. And so people are very excited in terms of what you could do, in terms of graphical fidelity, in terms of expanding mechanics, adding more features, building on top of the existing structure and foundation that you had. But instead, what kind of happened was a lot of laziness, a lot of greed, a lot of delays to the point where the game has been completely abandoned. And that's such a shame. And I think that it feels like such a betrayal, not just because of the laziness and the greed and stuff like that, but because of the potential. It really hurts because of the foundation you could have built on from the first game. And it really hurts, I think, in so many ways. And it's even, I think, more painful because, like I said, Kerbal Space Program is one of these games that I think transcends video games in so many different ways, where it has this potential to inspire people to do something like engineering or science in their life. There's these games that I think inspire people beyond the video game. It's beyond the fun and enjoyment. And I think that there was lost potential of what Kerbal Space Program 2 could have been. And so ever so often you find these games that have this special characteristic. And so Kerbal Space Program, the original game, is awesome. It's totally worth playing. It definitely is difficult, but if you give that game a chance, I think that could be a really unique experience if you've never played it before. It's a very fun game, and I'd highly recommend you check it out. But unfortunately, the second one is just this huge betrayal moment that just feels so bad. And I think especially because of the potential it could have had. Okay, so the next game, which hopefully this might anger a couple of people, and these are just my opinions in the end of the day, everyone, so keep that in mind, but it's Watch Dogs. And this game really got me back in the day. And Watch Dogs had this demo before the game came out, and the game looked absolutely beautiful. Had these beautiful graphics. It looked really fun and engaging. And I look back at that in hindsight and I think to myself, there was probably a lot of warning signs before that point. But when the game got released, the game had a huge downgrade in terms of graphical fidelity. And the game just felt very boring. And I think that a huge component of Watch Dogs was I just felt like it had this lack of identity, or this sterileness to its identity. It had these kind of similarities to Grand Theft Auto or Saints Row, but I just don't think it had that edge. It didn't have that identity. And it just felt very boring. I just felt very disappointed by Watch Dogs. And I know a lot of people, they love the second game in the series. But for me, Watch Dogs was just this kind of big downgrade moment in terms of what was promised in those trailers, or what you saw in those trailers, and then what actually happened. And then also, to me, it was just very boring. It was a very bland video game. And so to me, a lot of people have these moments in video games where they see these awesome tech demos, and then the game comes out and it doesn't look anything like it, or there's big downgrades, or it's just not nearly as fun as it's portrayed. So for me, Watch Dogs was just a big disappointment moment, a big betrayal moment. And so I know a lot of people like Watch Dogs, but for me, that was just a very disappointing experience. Okay, the next game is Fable. And honestly, you could probably put every single Fable game in here. And the Fable games are a unique game to put on this list here. And so with Fable, there was such hype for the first Fable game. I think Fable suffered the most because of the overhype and the expectations for the game. So it's this RPG where there was these promises that the world would adapt with you and trees would grow as you got older and all these things. And when the game released, a lot of these kind of promises or these kind of expectations that people had weren't met. And I think that disappointed a lot of people. And so a lot of people point towards this kind of hype mechanic from the creator or the lead designer, producer of the series. But in a way, we look back at that in hindsight, and in a lot of ways, I appreciate the passion. I appreciate the at least the mindset to try to push RPGs in a further dynamic, trying to push new RPG mechanics or dynamics. Maybe that was just a sales tactic in the end of the day. I don't know, but it disappointed a lot of fans. And the first Fable game is actually like a fun video game, even though it was very disappointing from the expectations that people had. I would actually highly recommend the game. I think it's the best in the series. It's my favorite in the series. It's not a perfect game, but it's a fun game. But really, it disappointed a lot of people with the massive expectations that people had from all these RPG mechanics. But then you have the second Fable game, and the hype train continued. If anyone remembers, there was this huge hype train behind Fable 2 as well, of just trying to build on some of the ideas of the first game. People had these expectations about how big that capital city was going to be and all these RPG mechanics. And then when the game got released, once again, another disappointing moment, another moment where expectations might have been a little bit too high for some people. The combat system also felt kind of very dumbed down with these kind of one-button mechanics. And it was an okay game at the time. I don't know if you played it now, how good it would be. It's been a long time since I played Fable 2, but once again, it was another example of just having these high expectations, this hype train, and then just disappointing. And then you come to Fable 3, and honestly, after being burned twice, I just knew, okay, just keep those expectations right on the floor, right? Just have no expectations about this game. And somehow, even though I had no expectations, the game felt very disappointing. There was a lot of missing features in the game. The ending and the end of the game just ends very abruptly. And there was a lot of anger and outrage at the time. And even though I didn't really have much expectations for Fable 3, it just felt really, really bad. And just so another example of even with low expectations, you're just disappointed. And the Fable series just has this trend, this almost curse of disappointing fans, at least in some respect. And of course, after Fable, I think there was this on-rail shooter that was just kind of weird. And of course, we have the new Fable game that was somewhat recently, I guess, announced. And the trailer just looks really bad. I don't really know what that main character is. I mean, that's just a baffling design decision. And so I think that Fable, like I said, just seems to be cursed with disappointing fans or having these expectations and not meeting them. And so to me, I don't know if the new Fable game is going to be that great, to be honest with you. I'd love to see Fable do great. I mean, I think the ideas of Fable are good. I think the foundations of Fable and dynamics throughout the games are good. I just think that sometimes the execution's not there, or certain features really needed to be expanded. But maybe that's just a function of what they could do. But I think that Fable is one of those big betrayal moments for a lot of people, very disappointing. And it doesn't have to be the first Fable game. It could be the third Fable game, the second Fable game. I'm sure that if you've played the Fable games, you probably have one that comes to your mind. But for me, I'll just pick the first Fable game. And like I said, it is worth playing. If you're into RPGs, the first game is pretty fun, even now. So definitely check it out if you never played the Fable games. But just at the time, there were such hype trains for these games that Betrayal just felt really, really bad. Okay, so next, and this will be a more modern example, and that'll be Dragon Age Veilguard. And so this one's going to hurt for a lot of fans, especially Dragon Age fans. And this is basically a similar dynamic to Mass Effect, which we talked about earlier. And Dragon Age Veilguard is just such a disrespectful moment, I think, to Dragon Age fans and RPG fans in general. And I've played all the Dragon Age games. I love the Dragon Age games. Origins is my favorite. I think it's the favorite for a lot of people. It has the most RPG mechanics. It's got great characters. It's a great game. Check it out if you've never played Dragon Age Origins or the Dragon Age games. But Dragon Age Veilguard, I think, in a way, speaks for itself with just the characters, the story, the combat. All the things just feel so bad. They're just so bad. And it just feels so disrespectful. And it's so bad in so many different ways, whether it's the lore being completely destroyed, the RPG mechanics being watered down, the terrible characters and storytelling, the combat just not feeling good, the art style feeling off. It's just something that I just think is such a disrespectful feeling, especially with people that have put a lot of time into the lore of the games from Origins onwards. And it's also very disappointing because Dragon Age is really cool. It's really awesome. It's got so much potential. I think Mass Effect has more potential, but Dragon Age is another series that you could make so many awesome RPGs from. You could build it in so many different directions. And so it's not just that Dragon Age Veilguard is a terrible game, and honestly, people have analyzed this to death, but it's if you just look at the game, it speaks for itself, essentially. But it's just such a disrespectful, I think, in so many different components and aspects to Dragon Age fans. And at the same time, too, it's just the lost potential of what could have been in terms of continuing the story from Inquisition or the plot threads from Origins or 2. I know a lot of people actually don't like 2. I think people are a little too hard on 2. I know 2 has its problems. I really enjoyed 2 at the time. I think with Veilguard, it's just very disappointing because of possibilities with all those plot threads, with all the characters and stuff like that. And I'm sure that actually within development, the game was in development for so long that there was probably some sort of change that happened, some sort of dynamic that caused this story dynamic and this just mess that occurred. I think, at one point it was called Dreadwolf, if I remember correctly. And so I think something happened. Maybe something happened in terms of trying to make the game series more popular or something like that. And this, once again, goes back to this idea of just short-termism and chasing these profits or changing the identity of these video games, which in a lot of ways you alienate your fan base and you create this situation where the identity changes and you ultimately don't get a successful product. And I think a lot of people that make some of those decisions, they don't really understand the core series, the core RPGs, why people love characters. And it's just, that's the big problem. And I think a lot of the people that maybe made those decisions don't really understand the series or why people love the RPG mechanics or something like that. And so there's a lot of short-termism with that. And so it's just very disappointing in so many different ways. Okay, and so next up is Dead Space 3. And Dead Space 1 and Dead Space 2 are awesome games. I'm not the biggest horror fan. I think those are great games. And a lot of people like the first game over the second game. I think that both of them have their pluses and minuses. I think they're both great games. But when the third game got announced, I remember seeing the game and it really had this kind of co-op element to things. And I knew that I was skeptical, to be honest with you. I was very skeptical of the third Dead Space game. When it finally got released, the game just wasn't very scary, to be honest with you. I just didn't think the game was very scary. I think the co-op elements of things really messed things up. And I know that there's been games that have basically incorporated these co-op elements to have made games kind of scary, like Lethal Company. But at the time, that really wasn't done very well. I felt like it was kind of trying to move towards more of this action combat game, this more story-based game. And of course, it also had these microtransactions into the game, which was just felt very off. And the game just wasn't as fun. And to the point where now, do we have any new Dead Space games? Nope, no new Dead Space games, except for the remaster of the first game. And this is just very disappointing just because I feel like it wasn't of the same quality and that same scariness as the first two games. And it's very disappointing because so many games have taken inspiration from the Dead Space series. I mean, if you look at a lot of new games that are in the horror genre, they feel very much like Dead Space, but I think that they haven't been able to get that same feeling as the Dead Space games. And so I think for a lot of people, Dead Space 3 was just this kind of moment of feeling very off, not as scary, and to the point where it's kind of led the series to the point where, we're probably not going to get a Dead Space 4, which is just a very disappointing moment. In a lot of ways, a betrayal from the core identity of what Dead Space was, which really sucks. Okay, and so next we have The Sims 4. So The Sims is one of those games too that at the time was a very special game. It's a very awesome game. And I'm talking about the original Sims games. It kind of goes back to that idea that I was talking about with Kerbal Space Program, where it's one of those games that comes around where it's so unique and so special. And I think it transcends video games in so many ways. I think it inspired a lot of people to be architects or to just think about video games very differently. And the first game is very special to a lot of people. And then the second game and the third game. And every single Sims game has kind of built upon the foundations from what came before that. So with The Sims, you had this innovative new idea. And then The Sims 2 took that further and it expanded all those mechanics. And then The Sims 3 expanded it further, had that open world mechanic and further advancing the series. But The Sims 4 was this moment of just ultimate betrayal for so many Sims fans because it was just lazy and greedy. There was no swimming pools at launch, which was a staple of the entire series. I mean, even to the first game. I mean, explain that. That makes no sense. You go backwards with no open world from The Sims 3 into this kind of more instance off dynamic of the older game series, which doesn't make a lot of sense. And even today, now you see just huge amounts of DLC for the Sims 4. I think if you wanted to buy everything, not discounted, it's over $1,000 at this point. And I know a lot of people like The Sims 4, so I get it. But it's just such a disrespectful moment if you look at the context of the broader Sims series in terms of what features were there, in terms of advancing the series, in terms of innovation, in terms of just providing this high quality product, a fun product. And I know a lot of people also continue to play The Sims 3. So there's an audience of The Sims 3 and The Sims 4, kind of like the Civilization series with Civ 5 and Civ 6. But essentially, it's just such a betrayal moment. And in a lot of ways, I feel like a big reason why we haven't seen like a Sims 5 is because it's just there's such a probably a revenue generation from The Sims 4 with all these microtransactions that if they kind of go with The Sims 5, they might get too greedy and they might kind of push things a little too far. And I think they're probably worried about that. And I know we've seen some attempts at some competitors to try to compete with The Sims like Inzoi and stuff like that. But there's something about the art style of The Sims that kind of just makes it a little bit lighthearted, that kind of cartoony nature, which really helps the series. That I think when you kind of go a little too realistic, it's just not the same vibe. But I think The Sims 4 is just a big betrayal moment, and it shows, I think, this broader trend within video games where the quality is just not there, the innovation is not there compared to previous entries in the series, the soul and energy is not there. And I think for people that haven't played the older video games, there's a missing context. And I think this is missing with a lot of newer video game players where they just haven't played the older video games, and so they miss the context. They miss the context of what came before in terms of innovation, in terms of passion and soul. And, you know, the older Sims games are awesome. They're so much fun. So many people have so much nostalgic memories for them. The soundtrack of the original Sims is amazing. Honestly, it's just, I think if you went back and played them, I'm sure that they're definitely a little bit rough around the edges, but there's a lot of fun with them. And I can't speak to the remastered release of The Sims 1, but essentially, I think to me, it's just this big betrayal moment in terms of just missing features and innovation and all those things. And I think a lot of people feel similarly to that. I think a lot of people would actually play a Sims game if there wasn't this microtransaction dynamic to things, this just feeling where you don't feel like you're playing a video game anymore. You just feel like you're in a marketplace. And I think a lot of people would play something like The Sims, but the monetization, the gamification, all these things just feel very in your face to the point where it just doesn't feel like the older Sims games. I don't think that's a nostalgic take. I think it's just, you have to look at the context, because I think some people would just go, oh, this is just an old man speaking about the older Sims games, but I think there's something to be said about that. And it's very unfortunate too, because I think a lot of fans of the Sims right now, the current ones, you just kind of get in this mindset where the company continues to just not treat the customer with respect. There seems to be this lack of respect or just passion in the game series, and the customer continues to just stay there. And you see this with so many different video game series. Like, I think you see this in Destiny, you see this in the sports games, and The Sims is very similar. And sometimes I just feel, it just feels bad because of the potential that the idea of The Sims has and the original passion behind the game series. So The Sims 4 is just, that's a bad disappointment. It's a bad betrayal moment, I think, for a lot of gamers. And of course, we move on to another game very similarly, SimCity, and I'm referring to the 2013 edition. And interestingly, SimCity 2013 was very disappointing, and especially so if you played the older SimCity games. And I think that if you look back at this at hindsight, it shouldn't have come to a surprise of why SimCity didn't do well. It didn't perform to expectations. You had these very small city sizes. It just seemed, everything seemed very watered down, especially compared to the older SimCity games. And I love the older SimCity games. So SimCity 2000 is an amazing video game, awesome video game. It had this beautiful manual that you could read through. It was dozens of pages. I think it was like 200 pages. I can't remember, but it was big. I think that some of that is nostalgia, but some of it's just so awesome. It's just, it shows that the joy of actually owning the video game and having this manual, and eventually things went away with that. It's awesome, beautiful manual. I think it had a UFO on it and this bridge and city, if I remember correctly. But the older SimCity games, I think there was more complexity to things. There was this element of passion to it. And with SimCity, the 2013 edition, I think you just saw this attempt to try to make it more mass appealable. There was just something not right there. And of course, we haven't seen a SimCity since then, at least to my understanding. And so Cities Skyline has kind of taken its place, which if you've never played the City Skylines games, they're awesome. Check them out. The second one didn't do as well, at least on its initial release. So I have not played the second one just because of all the performance issues that it's had. But the first one is definitely awesome. If you have that nostalgia for the old SimCity games, definitely check it out if you haven't already. And there's a bunch of other city builders that I think have taken the torch, taken the place of SimCity, but I still think there is some sort of place for this kind of more cartoony, a little bit more wacky city builder like SimCity. But unfortunately, when you have this dynamic of just You miss the soul of it, which is just this huge betrayal moment, I think, for a lot of gamers. And I really remember this distinctly. And unfortunately, it happened. Okay, and so next we have Halo 4. And honestly, there's a lot of different games you could put here in the Halo series. For me, it's Halo 4. And I remember playing Halo 4. So this was the first Halo game without Bungie, with the new studio. And I remember playing the campaign and the co-op campaign, and it was just boring. The soul just felt off about the game. The energy felt off. And I remember just playing Halo 4 and just thinking, yeah, I'm done. I'm done with Halo. And it sucks. And since then, I feel like Halo has just continuously declined. So for other people, maybe that betrayal moment was Halo 5, which a lot of people were very disappointed about. Maybe it was Halo Infinite with this campaign that just felt very off, the multiplayer feeling very much like Call of Duty, and just Halo losing its identity and its soul in so many different ways. For some people, it's actually Halo Reach. And to be honest with you, this might be a very unpopular opinion, but I actually really don't like Halo Reach. I thought the campaign was very boring. The characters had no emotional impact to me. And so there's just different points that you could say are your betrayal moment with Halo. It could be the sprinting mechanic. So people consider sprinting an element of Halo, or some people think that it's not about sprint at all. And so there's a bunch of huge debates about this. You could even say a betrayal moment is Halo 2's ending, which I kind of am joking about that. But I remember playing Halo 2 at the time, and that ending was just bad. Halo 2 ended on this just terrible cliffhanger. And I know people look back nostalgically at Halo 2, but I just remember playing that and going, what is this? Honestly, you could say that a big betrayal moment is the Halo 2 ending. And, I joke about that, but come on, everyone knew at the time that that was not the greatest ending. The game just felt like it ended very abruptly. But my favorite games in the series are Halo 1, 2, and 3. They're awesome. And just at some point, Halo just seemed to lose its identity. I think it lost what made it so fun and so core. And some people would say that Halo is a product of the past. And I still think that there's a possibility for Halo to be very popular again and be its own thing. Maybe it won't be bigger than Fortnite or something, but I think it all comes down to understanding what Halo is and sticking to that core identity and having really good people in place to make a great Halo game. But, for me, that big betrayal moment was Halo 4, where it just felt off. The soul felt off. The campaign was very boring. But I know for a lot of people, that betrayal moment could be a lot of different places, whether it's Infinite, 5, 4, Halo Reach, sprinting, something like that. It's unfortunate. And I think it hurts for a lot of people today because people love Halo and just Halo feels like this betrayal and this disappointment, especially recently. Okay, so we're going to go into a little bit more niche territory here, but Dynasty Warriors 9. And so I love Dynasty Warriors. Dynasty Warriors has a very loyal fan base. And so my favorite is actually 3. Love Dynasty Warriors 3. My favorite character is Gan Ning. If anyone has played Dynasty Warriors, it's an awesome character. Let me know which character is your favorite. But yeah, Gan Ning. With Dynasty Warriors 9, it was this first attempt to go into the open world for Dynasty Warriors. And I remember seeing that and being extremely skeptical and very cautious and thinking to myself, well, I don't trust this. I think if anyone knows with the Dynasty Warriors series, it's one of those series where it's a little lazy. There's not like a ton of innovation. It's a lot of the same stuff over and over again. And so when you try to make this leap into the open world, you're just a little cautious because it's like this, almost like the perfect example of just slapping an open world onto something and it's not fun. You need this immersive open world. You need to feel immersed, especially with like an RPG. There needs to be points of interest. It can be very hard to execute effectively on an open world. And so just knowing Dynasty Warriors, I'm like, there's no way. I think anyone that thought about this at all just knew there's no way this is going to be good. And sure enough, the game released and the open world was very barren. The game just felt very unfun. There was a lot of problems with the video game, and there was a lot of outrage for Dynasty Warriors 9. And it's kind of recovered since then with, I think, Dynasty Warriors Origins and stuff like that. But Dynasty Warriors 9, it was just this, you knew with the open world, at least I did. I was like, there's no way this is going to be good. Okay. There's no way. So, I think that was a big betrayal moment for a lot of people, but when you're talking about Dynasty Warriors, I mean, there's a lot of people that could pick another game in the series or something else that they could consider a betrayal moment. If you have something, you're a big Dynasty Warriors fan, let me know what it is. But for me, I just decided let's put Dynasty Warriors 9 on here. Okay. And so now we're going to move on to something that some of the older gamers might appreciate, some of the graybeards. And we're going to go into the MMORPG world, and we're going to be talking about Star Wars Galaxies. And so if anyone's played this game, they know exactly what I'm going to be talking about. And so there's the two kind of things, the CU combat updates and then the NGE new game enhancements. And so these mechanics kind of very fundamentally change the game in different ways. And at least with the NGE, it kind of, there was like a suddenness to it. So there felt it was like this big betrayal moment, I think, for a lot of people. But it kind of very fundamentally altered the game. It tried to make the game more approachable, but there was also kind of these trimming down of the number of professions in the game. And so it felt like this dumbing down of the gameplay mechanics. It made the combat system more accessible and watered down. And a lot of ways, it was trying to chase and compete with the popularity of World of Warcraft. And I think people look back at this in hindsight and they think, well, maybe this was necessary or stuff like that. But to me, I just think of it as this moment of changing your core identity and chasing some sort of trend and just not working out. And sometimes you have to do that. But I think it's important to just try to understand your identity, and certain games are not going to be nearly as popular as others, and just to kind of accept that. And I think that with Star Wars Galaxies, the other thing too is that there's so much potential with something like this. When you play Star Wars Galaxies, you feel very immersed given the sandbox nature of the game. And I know there's Star Wars: The Old Republic, but Star Wars Galaxy with the Galaxies with the sandbox nature of it, just you feel very immersed in the Star Wars universe. And there's obviously things that could have been done better, but I still love the idea of trying to do something like that. And I still think we haven't fully seen something like this sandbox sci-fi or even Star Wars kind of MMO done extremely well. And it's probably going to be difficult just given the lack of popularity with a lot of MMORPGs nowadays. But for the people that played Star Wars Galaxies, I think that this was a huge betrayal moment for a lot of people. Betrayals, I think, were a little bit less common. And so this was just like a big moment, I think, especially for a lot of MMORPG gamers. And of course, there is Star Wars: The Old Republic. And I've played The Old Republic, and I didn't really care for it too much, to be honest with you. It is free to play now, and a couple of the stories are actually worth playing through. A lot of people would say the Imperial Agent story is worth playing, the Bounty Hunter story. Some of them are fun, and you can actually get pretty good story out of the games. And you just kind of skip the side quests and you just do your character class quests, and you can actually have a lot of fun with it. So the Old Republic is very different than Galaxies. It just doesn't have that same sandbox nature. It doesn't have some of that grit. And so I think that the Old Republic doesn't have what I think a lot of people want out of a Star Wars MMO. Or even a sci-fi MMO. The story mechanics and stuff are cool, but it's missing something, to be honest with you. And as a core MMO beyond the story stuff that I talked about, I think it's very flawed as a game. But Star Wars Galaxy is just a huge moment of just feeling really bad. And that reminds me, there's another awesome video game. I don't have any betrayal moments with this, but Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic. If you've never played that game, check it out. It's an awesome RPG, totally worth playing. One of the best Star Wars games ever made, by the way. Just thought of that, talking about Star Wars Galaxies. But yeah, Star Wars Galaxies is just a huge betrayal moment for a lot of people. If you haven't played EVE Online, totally worth checking out. I don't know about the state of EVE Online nowadays. I used to play a lot of EVE Online. I think that that's probably the closest you can get in some respects to feeling of Star Wars Galaxies. And I know EVE is very intimidating for a lot of people, but if you're trying to find the best MMOs on the market, EVE Online is one of them, I would say. But don't quote me on that because I haven't played EVE Online in a while, and so it might have changed. But moving on from Star Wars Galaxies, we'll talk about another MMORPG, and that's RuneScape. In particular, RuneScape 2. And there's a lot of betrayal moments that people could have with this one, whether it's the wilderness removal or the free trade removal or summoning or the evolution of combat. There's a lot of betrayal moments, and I think a lot of people have this interesting relationship with RuneScape. But of course, it's gotten a resurgence recently, or just over time, with old school RuneScape. And honestly, if you really are talking about the two best MMORPGs to play in the market, I think that they're EVE Online and OSRS. I think that they capture the closest you can get to that MMO experience. Some people would say Final Fantasy XIV. I think that's a very different experience, and it's very story-based, but I would say it's probably those two MMOs. I think that there was a lot of betrayal moments with RuneScape to the point where people are very bitter about that. But I think that with OSRS, it's just this resurgence. And I think in so many ways, it shows that the core ideas behind these MMOs of the past are still there. They're great ideas. And a lot of them go beyond just the MMORPG mechanic and the idea. There's so much more. It shows the amazing potential that these old ideas have. And then lastly, we'll move on to another MMORPG, which is World of Warcraft. And so I don't think that there was a single betrayal moment for World of Warcraft. I actually have this huge video analysis on World of Warcraft. It's over an hour long, talking about the decline of old World of Warcraft. And so check that out. I talk about things way more in depth in that video. And so check that out. It's a really awesome video. But I think that for World of Warcraft, it was more of a gradual decline than a single moment. But if you had to say a single moment for World of Warcraft, a lot of people would say it's maybe Burning Crusade with flying mounts and stuff like that. Maybe it was Wrath of the Lich King. Or for other people, it was Cataclysm, that destruction of the old world, or Warlords of Draenor, or even more recently, Shadowlands or Battle of Azeroth. But I think that for a lot of people, it was this kind of gradual decline, this gradual betrayal, rather than a single moment. But like I said, I have this huge analysis about the decline of old World of Warcraft. It's an awesome video. If you're really into World of Warcraft, want to learn more, check that out. It's an awesome video. And so next, I wanted to talk about a more new game I think a lot of people are going to have a very strong emotional reaction to, and it's Cyberpunk 2077. And so Cyberpunk 2077, there was so much hype for this game. The hype was insane. And for anyone that really criticized it, there was a lot of aggressive pushback. And I remember seeing this game and being intrigued by it, intrigued with the awesome graphics and the RPG mechanics, but I just knew something was off. You've been burned, if you've been playing video games enough for long enough, you've been burned enough times where you go, I don't trust this. I think a lot of graybeards, a lot of older gamers were looking at this and going, we're not doing this. There's no way. I'm not going over there. And then you see all these newer gamers going, what's wrong? Why aren't you coming with us to the hype train? It's like, nope, I'm good. I'm good over here. And you just see a whole host of 12 old guys, old gamers, just with their gray beards, just arms crossed, looking at Cyberpunk going, I'm not trusting that. And just all these people going in to the hype train that's about to run off a cliff. When Cyberpunk 2077 released, the game was a complete disaster. I mean, the game just did not function on older consoles, which is, I mean, a complete disaster. And not only that, though, you had all these huge performance issues beyond that. The RPG mechanics were very watered down. The gameplay wasn't just, it didn't feel as good as I think people had with expectations. And there was a lot of warning signs, whether it was the celebrity cameos or the pulling back of the RPG mechanics, or really that big, huge red flag should have been that people weren't showing their own gameplay footage of the reviews. I mean, that should have been like a level 10 out of 10 warning sign. And I know that the game has improved since then. They've made a lot of fixes. And of course, they've released the DLC, which has been very well received by a lot of people. But honestly, this is going to be very unpopular opinion. I know I'm just about to see the rage comments, but I don't think that Cyberpunk 2077 is really all that great. I think that even with the DLC and the fixes, the game just feels, I don't think it's nearly to the extent of what was promised. And I just don't even know if it's as good as people claim it is, despite the improvements and changes. And I know a lot of people enjoy it, and that's fine. It's just my opinion in the end of the day. But I think there's other people that think similarly. But Cyberpunk, I think, was a huge betrayal moment. And I think some people just have too short of a memory. They're too quick to forgive. I mean, the game just did not function on older consoles. And the promises from what it was in the hype train just did not match those expectations. And it's just hard to believe sometimes where they decided, yep, this is good, let's ship it, let's release it. It just seemed like a total mess. And so that was a big betrayal moment, I think, for a lot of people, especially kind of newer gamers. But that was a really bad one, to be honest with you. And I think even with the releases now, I think some people are just too quick to just forget about that. And in a lot of ways, it just shows the state of the gaming industry in so many different ways. And especially after that, I think it should make people a little bit cautious about The Witcher 4, even though The Witcher 3 is a great game. But we'll see. Okay, so the next one, this is going to be a big one for a lot of people, is Warhammer 40,000 Dawn of War 3. And of course, this is a big one that I think a lot of people just, it hurts. It feels like a big betrayal moment. And I love Warhammer and Warhammer 40K. I think the best faction is the Imperial Guard and Astra Militarum. What is that? And I think for anyone that knows, they know what I'm talking about. It's the Imperial Guard, not the Astra Militarum. And the Inquisition's also cool too. Awesome faction. But anyways, the first Dawn of War game is awesome. Great RTS game. And it's one of the, I think, better 40K games. And it just had a very passionate fan base that had all these awesome expansion packs added to it. And then you had the second game, which some people would actually maybe say that was a betrayal moment as well. It kind of changed the gameplay up a little bit too. I didn't really care for Dawn of War 2. I like the first game, but not the second one. And then the third game came out, and it just really shifted the core gameplay style, had a very poor campaign. It just wasn't nearly as fun, and there was just a lot of negative reaction to the third Dawn of War game. And of course, there is the fourth game that got announced recently. It does look good. It looks very similar to the first Dawn of War, but after the third Dawn of War, I'm very skeptical about it, to be honest with you. And so we'll wait and see. We'll see what happens. Warhammer 40K Dawn of War 3 is just a big betrayal moment for a lot of people, especially because of how much they love the first Dawn of War game. And if you actually want an awesome 40K game, by the way, check out Warhammer 40,000 Mechanicus. That's an awesome game. It's kind of like XCOM. It's a strategy game. There's a lot of Warhammer 40,000 games that aren't very good, but check out Mechanicus. It's an awesome game for 40K fans out there. Adaptus Mechanicus, awesome faction too, and it really just nails that 40K aesthetic. It's got a great soundtrack too, awesome aesthetic. One of the best games, I think, in terms of nailing down that Warhammer, that dark grittiness of the universe. And then also, if you've never played Dawn of War 1 and you're into older RTS games, check it out. It's an awesome game for the Emperor, of course, everyone, and for the Imperial Guard. Okay, so another strategy game here. This one's a more recent one, and it's going to hurt for a lot of people, and it's Civilization 7. So I'm a big Civ fan. I love Civilization. I've played a lot of the games in the series over the years, and I think that the pinnacle of the series was probably Civ 5. And when I say pinnacle, I'm not saying it's the best game, because I know a lot of people love Civ 4, 3, 2, etc. But I think, with all the games, there was these kind of steps forward and then these steps backward. And so you have improvements and declines and stuff like that. But I think Civ 5 is that nice amalgamation of all those elements. And then you have Civ 6, which a lot of people like too. Personally, I don't care for Civ 6. I also don't like the art style of Civ 6 and the direction that that's gone. But with Civ 7, this was a huge, I think, betrayal moment for a lot of people, or at least a disappointing moment for a lot of people, because it really changed the core gameplay mechanics of the Civ games. So you have this Civ switching mechanic, and you kind of keep the same leader, which to me is just so weird. It's so jarring. You get taken out of the immersion of the game. And I think that something that's really important about strategy games is being immersed. And there's like kind of this role playing, this lore that you have with strategy games. Even if you're not like directly role playing, you feel immersed in terms of building your empire up. Maybe you build a settlement on an island, and then it has a port, and then there's a monument, and then there's a wonder. And so you like to see this progression of your cities and of your empire. You see the growth and the wars that happened. And so when you change factions, or when you change civilizations, I think it just really throws you out of the mix. And it almost seems like if you were going to do that, maybe change leaders, but keep the same Civ. But I don't know why they did that. I mean, maybe it's because it's easier to sell personalities or try to connect with the Civ leaders. I mean, I'm trying to understand the psychology of why they did this, or trying to understand it from a monetization perspective. But I feel like maybe there was something like that in the process. I'm not sure, but that was just such a core mechanic that changed things. And then, of course, there was a lot of, I think, watering down of certain mechanics. So there's less ages now. I don't think that the 3 ages mechanic idea really works very well. I think that some of the Civ leader decisions are very questionable. And also, no British Empire at launch. I mean, what are they going to sell that back to you? Another moment of disrespect. And then all this with a very hefty price tag. And it just feels very disrespectful and a big betrayal for a lot of people. Also, small map sizes. I think a lot of people that are really into the multiplayer, there just seems to be a disconnect with the multiplayer changes. And so it just feels really bad. And I know some people like Civ 7, but if you look at the Steam player count numbers, I think it speaks for itself, where you see that people are playing more Civ 6 and Civ 5, way older games, than Civ 7. And of course, I also don't like the direction of moving into this cartoony style. Maybe it's easier to sell microtransactions, or it makes it more performant on other systems or mobile or Switch or something like that. But I like the more realistic graphics. It makes me feel more immersed. So I don't like that direction, but just Civ 7 just feels very bad. It feels like a very big departure away from the Civ series, and not in a good way. And it's not to say that you can't innovate or try something different. It just seems just not the best, to be honest with you. I think they wanted more people to finish a Civ game. But like, to me, that doesn't seem to make sense, because there's this idea of one more turn and people playing Civ, and then you look at the clock and it's 3 a.m. And so clearly the games were very popular. People love Civ 5. People like Civ 6, even though I don't like Civ 6. And so, yeah, maybe some people didn't finish the game, but like, who cares? The games are popular. They've been popular with tons of people, whether it was Civ 4, Civ 3 before that. And so why do you need more people to finish the game? People are enjoying your game. I think that they increased in popularity in so many respects. And so maybe it was just an attempt to get even more people into Civilization. But I think that at some point, there's a limit to how many people you can get into certain strategy games. I mean, there's only so many people that are going to play Paradox games, like EU4 as an example. And so I don't know if that was the right decision to try to get people to finish games more. Especially with these ages, you feel very separated from things. And so to me, Civ 7 is just a big disappointment. I don't know. That's just my sense of it, but I feel like that's a bad one for a lot of people. And if you've never played the Civilization games, totally worth checking out. I would personally recommend Civ 5. Some people would say Civ 6. Some people would actually even suggest the older games, but I think Civ 5 or 6 are good enough. I mean, you don't have to go back and play Civ 3. Some people would argue that, but I personally like Civ 5 way more than Civ 6. If you've never played a Civ game, you're in for a great time. And you'll be playing at night, and then it'll be 2 a.m. before you know it, and you're still wanting to play. So it's a very addicting game series. But unfortunately, Civ 7 is just a huge disappointment. Okay, so next, Warcraft 3 Reforged. So I love Warcraft 3. Warcraft 3 is an amazing game. If you've never played it, totally worth checking out. The campaign is awesome. But Warcraft 3 Reforged was just such a disappointing moment for a lot of people. There was missing features, and there was kind of this erosion of the old community and kind of merging both of the old game and the new game together. It just felt, I think, in a lot of ways very lazy and a missed opportunity in so many respects. Because Warcraft 3 is an awesome game. I remember playing all the mods back in the day. This is where Dota or League of Legends concept of that comes from. I remember playing those back in the day, the tower defense mods. And there was actually a ship MOBA game in Warcraft 3, at least I remember correctly. It was kind of like Dota, but it was with ships, like naval ships. If anyone remembers that, let me know. I swear playing that. And so that was a ton of fun. And of course, the whole story with Arthas and everything else. But I just felt like Warcraft 3 Reforged was a very disappointing moment for a lot of people. It just felt like a betrayal because of the awesome potential that Warcraft could have had. Similarly, on that vein, is Diablo 3 and Diablo 4. Now, I'm not the biggest Diablo fan. I've played the older Diablo games, but Diablo 3 just felt very off to me. It didn't feel very fun. And of course, there was a lot of, I think, outrage or concern given the player auction house at the time. And this was one of those moments that I think we started to see some of the signs that we see now with the gaming industry, with kind of some of these pushes slowly moving there. Of course, there was also the complaints about the always online and some simplified RPG mechanics, issues with the in-game. And I think that Diablo 3 and Diablo 4 aren't necessarily like bad games, but I just think that they're middling in some ways. They just feel like they could be so much more. There's so much more potential. I think that's why a lot of people have moved on to Path of Exile. And in so many respects, maybe that is the better choice. But I think Diablo 3 and Diablo 4, I think they're less betrayal moments. I mean, in some respects they are, but they're just these big disappointing moments in terms of just possibly being something better than we got. It just seemed like some of the soul energy just felt off. It's hard to put to words sometimes, where just some of these newer games, they miss this soul and energy. And it's not nostalgia. You can go back and play some of these older games that I talked about and have a blast with them. So there's something there in some of these ideas, but I think Diablo 3 and Diablo 4 kind of meet this disappointing factor that I'm talking about. And so it's hard for me to put this to words exactly, but for me, I'd put it at Diablo 3. Some people would put Diablo 4, but regardless. Okay, so another one. This is a little bit more topical, especially recently, and people are going to be very passionate about this and probably debate it, but it's Battlefield 5. And, Battlefield 5, I think there was a lot of outrage at the time for Battlefield 5. And the game also just felt very different than a lot of the older Battlefield games. It seemed to be a lot more faster paced, a lot less teamwork oriented. And honestly, really, you could even say, instead of Battlefield 5 on this list, Battlefield 2042, where there was a lot of hype and expectations with that game, especially with the huge player counts, these kind of huge weather events and stuff like that. And the game just had this really poor performance, these downgrades, whole operator thing, which was against the identity of the past Battlefield games with classes and just not feeling as good. And so I think those were two big disappointment moments for a lot of Battlefield fans. I love the older Battlefield games like 1942, Battlefield 2, that's my favorite, Battlefield 2142, another awesome game. But I think that for a lot of people, there's like a big betrayal or disappointment moment with Battlefield 5 and Battlefield 2042. And of course, we have Battlefield 6 coming out, and actually have a huge video analysis on this, so definitely check that out if you're interested. But I think that there's some concerns with that. Despite the hype, there's a lot of a feeling like the game is very fast-paced. There's a Call of Duty feeling to it in a lot of ways. And so, I think I have my concerns about Battlefield 6, especially as a person that loves the older Battlefield games. But will Battlefield 6 be this big betrayal moment? I don't think so. I think it'll probably be more of a directional shift than a moment of disappointment like Battlefield 5 or Battlefield 2042, but I could be totally wrong about that. But like I said, if you're interested in Battlefield 6 or some analysis on that, check it out. I have an awesome video on this where I talk more about it in depth. Okay, so this one's going to anger a lot of people, and people are going to be very passionate on both sides of the fence with this, and it is Fallout 4. Now, before you get too angry, I don't think that Fallout 4 is a terrible game, but for me, it was a very disappointing game. It felt like a betrayal in some respects because the game just felt off to me. And I think the biggest thing for me with Fallout 4 is the voiced protagonist. I really don't like that idea. It really takes you out of the role playing and the immersion of being your own character. It just doesn't work with me. I didn't really care for that. And also, the RPG mechanics just felt off. The world felt off. It just didn't seem as fun to me. And at the same time, too, you had this changing art style. It was a lot more brighter colors. And you see this with Fallout 76 as well, versus this kind of dark and grittiness of the Fallout series. And of course, depending on who you are, you might compare Fallout 1 and 2 to Fallout 3, New Vegas, and stuff like that. I think that Fallout 1 and 2, they're kind of different games in a way, so you can't really compare them exactly. But yeah, you had this changing art style, I think, with Fallout 4 and then 76, which you could also put Fallout 76 here as well. That was a big betrayal moment for a lot of people, just given the terrible performance issues that the game had at launch, the lack of NPCs, and some of the microtransactions. And I know a lot of people really like Fallout 76, but for me, Fallout 4 and Fallout 76 were just moves in directions that I don't really care for in terms of the art style and the direction of the overall series. And my favorite Fallout game is actually New Vegas. Yep, I'm one of those people. But I think that Fallout New Vegas it's got the best role-playing aspect. It's got the best immersion and stuff like that. And I also like Fallout 3 as well. I think a lot of people are very hard on Fallout 3. There's been a lot of these really detailed analyses about why Fallout 3 is terrible and you shouldn't enjoy it or whatever, but I don't really care, to be honest with you. I enjoyed Fallout 3, and of course the older Fallout games are great as well. But yeah, Fallout New Vegas is awesome. If you've never played the Fallout games, check out Fallout 3 or New Vegas. I'd probably start with Fallout 3 if you never played the Fallout games. I think that the transition to New Vegas would be easier versus going from New Vegas to Fallout 3. But regardless, Fallout 4, I know a lot of people love the game. There's a lot of mods for it, all the DLC and stuff. But for me personally, and I think for a lot of people, it just felt very off because of the voice protagonist and all those dynamics. And I mean, I think if we're being objective, you can see where people are coming from. It's not just people are being haters or they're old and nostalgic. I think that there's clear directional shifts to the point where, it makes me very skeptical about Fallout 5, to be honest with you. And even the Elder Scrolls 6, which I also have a video on about the Elder Scrolls 6. Check that out as well. It's a great analysis. But yeah, Fallout 4 was just kind of a big disappointment moment for me, kind of feeling like a betrayal and a directional shift in the Fallout series. Okay, so next we have Subnautica Below Zero. And I like to think of this less as a betrayal moment. It's probably more of a disappointment. Maybe it shouldn't even really be here, but I love Subnautica. Subnautica is an awesome game. If you've never played Subnautica, check it out. It's super immersive. It's an awesome, awesome game. Even if you think that you really aren't into these kind of survival games, it's a great game. Check it out. It's so good. I don't even want to really spoil it for you, but essentially Below Zero is in a lot of ways a directional shift because of the voice protagonists. And I don't think that they were really well done. The map wasn't nearly as good. And you kind of I think you saw some recycling mechanics that just didn't really work as well. And I think it was very disappointing for a lot of people. So it's less of a betrayal moment. It's probably a little too harsh to say that. It's probably more of a disappointing moment. But I think when we look at Subnautica 2, there's so many people that love the first Subnautica. And I look at the new Subnautica that's supposed to come out, and there's a lot of red flags. There's a lot of concerns. I mean, I think the co-op feature idea is really awesome, but there's been just some problems at the studio. And I'm worried that that game is not going to have that same magic as the first game. So that actually might end up being the betrayal moment, depending on how it is. But of course, I hope that the next Subnautica game is awesome because the first one is so great. But Below Zero, I think, was one of those moments that just felt like a big disappointment for a lot of people. And in a lot of ways, a little bit of a warning sign to what we could see with Subnautica 2. Hopefully I'm wrong about that. Hope Subnautica 2 is great. Okay, so next we have The Last of Us Part 2. Now, a lot of people feel like The Last of Us 2 was a betrayal moment. And if you have any desire to ever play The Last of Us, I'm going to be giving a quick spoiler if you don't even know the spoiler already, but I think that there was essentially a big feeling of betrayal with the death of Joel in The Last of Us Part 2. And I understand, in a sense, like the idea behind it, because I think that, especially video game storytelling, there would be some benefit, I think, to having more higher stakes storytelling where not every single character is safe, kind of like Game of Thrones storytelling where it's not just every character is safe or something like that. But I feel like the way that it was done was just not executed very well. It wasn't done. It felt like there was a level of just vitriol to the decision. And there wasn't really this huge cast of characters that you could rely on after Joel was no longer in the game. And at the same time, too, the characters afterwards weren't very fun. And I don't think the gameplay was that great in the first game. And you just kind of saw that with the continuation into The Last of Us Part 2. At the same time, too, like I said, the characters just didn't, even though you lost a character, it just doesn't feel like you gained anything in its place. And to the point where I don't know, is there even a Last of Us Part 3 coming out? I'm not even sure, but I think that there's been a lot of damage done to this whole series in terms of people liking things, because the first game is really great despite all of its problems. I know a lot of people don't like The Last of Us Part 1 because of the gameplay, which I understand, and this kind of directional trend towards movie games and stuff like that. But for what it was at the time, I think it's a great game. It's got this great dynamic between Joel and Ellie, and a great ambiguous ending. But at the same time, too, though, I think just the second one just feels very mean. It feels very mean-spirited. And of course, they try to do these lore changes and stuff, which just feels very disrespectful in so many ways. And it's got a cool universe, but I just think that just some of these dynamics have just really soured a lot of people's perspective about The Last of Us. And so I think that The Last of Us Part 2 was a big betrayal moment for a lot of people. And so now we're going to go into something a little bit more old school, and that is Banjo-Kazooie Nuts and Bolts. And I think that for the people that know what I'm talking about, they're going to be like, oh yes, I forgot about this. But the original two Banjo-Kazooie games are awesome. Great platformers on the N64, Banjo-Kazooie, Banjo-Tooie. And there was kind of a break after those two games, and then you had Banjo-Kazooie Nuts and Bolts, which was just a total change in pace from the old school platformers that the first two games were like. And it had this kind of car mechanic, this car building mechanic. There was some of these platform dynamics, but it wasn't the same, and it was very disappointing for a lot of fans. And there was also this kind of very different art style. And I think a lot of people look back at Nuts and Bolts now and they go, it's not that bad. It's got a unique twist on the gameplay mechanics and stuff like that. But at the time, it was just, I think, not what a lot of people wanted from a Banjo-Kazooie game, to the point now where we haven't really seen anything from Banjo-Kazooie, at least to my understanding, since then. We kind of saw something like Yooka-Laylee, which was trying to imitate, I think, something like Banjo-Kazooie, but it just didn't, I don't think it matched that same quality as the old Banjo-Kazooie games. But Banjo-Kazooie Nuts and Bolts just was a big betrayal moment for a lot of people. A lot of people might not know this betrayal moment, I think, if you never played those games, but it's unfortunate too, because I think Banjo-Kazooie could totally make a resurgence, as could a lot of platformers like Spyro and stuff like that. I think with the recent success of Astrobot, there's a potential for putting out some awesome platforming games, and I think that you could probably put out platforming games in a pretty quick fashion. I don't think you need 5-7 year development times to make some of these games, and I'd love to see a resurgence of Spyro and Banjo-Kazooie, but Banjo-Kazooie Nuts and Bolts, just not really sure what that was, especially at the time. And it's such a shame that I feel like that series is just not being leveraged right now. And of course, if you've never played the first two games, they're awesome. They're awesome platformers. I know that they have their problems, just like a lot of people have problems with Donkey Kong 64 and its collectathon aspect, but Donkey Kong 64 is awesome. I don't care if people don't like that game. That's a great game too. So next, we move on to Overwatch 2, and a lot of people that are big fans of Overwatch are going to totally feel this one. So Overwatch 2 felt like a big betrayal for a lot of people. Of course, you saw the discontinuation of the first Overwatch, which I think angered a ton of people. And what you got in place of that wasn't that great. There was that move from 6v6 to 5v5, which a lot of people have commented on, of which that maybe ruins the balance of the game and the whole dynamic of the game. There's been a lot of huge debates about that. You had 3 new characters and, of course, a new map and new game mode, and it just didn't feel like you got a lot in return for Overwatch 2. And there was, of course, a lot of performance issues, especially at launch. There's been these kind of microtransaction stuff that people really don't like. And an overall, I guess for a lot of players, a direction of the game that hasn't been great, especially for a large chunk of its life cycle so far. And of course, it's received a lot of competition recently from Marvel rivals. And so I think with Overwatch 2, there's just so much potential with this series. And it's very disappointing of what Overwatch could be. And I actually have a huge video on Overwatch 2 and Overwatch in general and the huge potential it has. Huge video. If you're interested in Overwatch, check that out. But I think that Overwatch 2 was just very disappointing because so many people love the first Overwatch game. They love the characters and the universe, and there's such amazing potential, but Overwatch 2 just felt very lazy. It didn't feel like a proper sequel. And especially too with the cancellation of the single player elements, that was just another betrayal moment. So you kind of saw this also when Overwatch 2 came to Steam, and there was just these huge amount of negative reviews to the game. And so I think with Overwatch 2, it feels like a big betrayal moment for a lot of people, just because of the single player campaign cancellation, the poor performance at launch, or just the discontinuation of Overwatch, or just the direction of the game in general. And so I think that's a big betrayal moment for a lot of people. Okay, and so next we have Final Fantasy 13. And so you could put a lot of different Final Fantasy games in here, and I'm actually going to talk about a bunch of them. So Final Fantasy 13, I think, was a directional shift for the Final Fantasy games in so many respects. You could also say Final Fantasy 10 too, or 12. I think Final Fantasy 13, there was a huge amount of expectations, especially with the graphics. It's kind of Final Fantasy moving into the next generation of consoles and stuff like that. But the game ended up just disappointing a lot of fans. And I know that there's a lot of fans of Final Fantasy 13 and Lightning Returns, but for me, Final Fantasy 13 is a very boring game. I think it's got an incoherent story, or if there is a coherent story there, I don't know, you have to do a lot of reading of the data logs or watch a YouTube essay analysis on it. And then of course there's just these hallway corridors that just feels really bad. And the combat system, I just did not like that. A lot of people don't like the combat system. I don't think the characters are very good. And it just felt like this big betrayal moment for a lot of gamers. And it just feels like Final Fantasy moved in this different direction and not for the better. And probably a huge component to that is, of course, certain key figures leaving the company, like Sakaguchi, of course. But of course, that was before this point anyways. But I think you started to see some of the effects of things. But of course, depending on who you are, maybe that betrayal moment for Final Fantasy happens somewhere else along the line. A lot of people would also point to 15. There was a lot of hype for that game, a lot of expectations given its graphics and stuff like that. And I think that also was very disappointing. I think that's not the greatest Final Fantasy game either. And Final Fantasy 15, I think, was very disappointing in a lot of ways, from the combat, from the story, from all those things, especially relative to probably what it was supposed to be. I think for some people also, a big betrayal moment actually might even be Final Fantasy 12, which kind of took the combat style into this weird MMO RPG-like idea. The story was very epic and opera-based in a sense. It was very epic. And I kind of like the idea of where it was going with that, but I don't think the execution was really good. I think there's some great songs in Final Fantasy 12. I don't really care for Final Fantasy 12 too much. I don't think it's terrible, but it's not that great in my opinion. And so some people like it, but think that was a big directional shift for Final Fantasy. Some people might put that as a betrayal moment, or some people even would say Final Fantasy X-2, which was kind of this spin-off game from Final Fantasy X that I think might have been the initial start of the changes you saw with the Final Fantasy games. Or even some people that are into the MMOs might say Final Fantasy XIV with the initial launch of the game that was just in this very disastrous state. I never played the original Final Fantasy XIV MMO, so I can't speak to that exactly, but I think that might have been a big betrayal moment for a lot of people. And of course, Final Fantasy XIV has recovered a lot since then with its expansion packs and its direction shift, which is great. I've actually given Final Fantasy XIV a try, but I didn't really care for it. I thought it was very boring. It didn't scratch the things that I like in an MMORPG. And I know it's like this more story-based MMO, and so there's a lot of people that really love the story, but from the amount that I played, I just didn't even think that was good at all. And there's a lot of flaws, I think, with Final Fantasy XIV, which that's probably going to anger a ton of people. But regardless, if people like Final Fantasy XIV, that's fine. My experience with it has just not, I didn't really care for it too much. But essentially, that could have been a betrayal moment for you. But with all these points, for me, I think I would put it at Final Fantasy XIII. And I think for a lot of people, that would be that kind of big betrayal moment for the Final Fantasy series. And of course, we go into the last game, which in my opinion, it's my most disappointing video game of all time. And I think for the people that know it, they're going to feel that same passion that I do. And it's Spore. And so yes, I think for the people that know, they know. So Spore had such amazing potential. There was these early gameplay or these early previews of the game, which are still on YouTube. And if you go to the comment section on them, it's a lot of people basically probably saying and echoing similar comments to what I'm saying. But the game had such amazing potential. It was a lot more complicated than what it originally released at. It had a little bit more of a realistic, gritty graphics. And so when the game finally came out, art style had changed. The gameplay mechanics seemed very watered down. And it's not that Spore is a bad game. It's an all right game, but it's just the potential, especially from those early previews, is so disappointing. It just feels like this huge betrayal. And I think that Spore could have been something like Kerbal Space Program, or Microsoft Flight Simulator or something like that that I was talking about earlier, where I think it could have been something that inspired people to get into science. It could have had this huge level of popularity and this huge cultural component behind it if it was treated differently. And I'd still love to see a game like Spore come out, but whether or not a studio can achieve that is a whole other story. But I think just Spore, the amazing ideas behind the creature creator that it had, or the original graphic style that probably helped you to stay immersed in the world, or just the complexity that I think was originally envisioned. It feels like such a betrayal and disappointing moment, I think, for a lot of gamers because of what could have been. And I think we all still look at that and go, I'd love to see a video game like that. And so for me, that's the most disappointing video game release of all time for me. And in a sense, just this biggest betrayal, because it just, the potential of that could have been so much more. And I appreciate you all sticking with me to the end. We've talked about a lot of video games, and I'm sure there's a lot of video games that I didn't cover exactly. There's too many to count, and I've probably forgotten some. So if I didn't mention a video game that was a big betrayal moment for you or disappointment, let me know in the comments. I'd love to have this huge discussion about this. And also, let me know what you think about any of the games that we talked about today or the games that we didn't talk about. And hey, if you liked this video, consider subscribing. Check out the content on my channel. I talk a lot about video games, a lot of awesome videos that I think you might really enjoy, and I appreciate you sticking with me to the whole end of this video. And I will see you in the next video.